Welcome to the Jill on Money Show. It's Saturday, August 3rd, and we've got such a treat for you this weekend because we have a whip smart youngster who is really illuminating the world about economics and markets. Her name is Kyla Scanlon. She's written a book that's called In This Economy, How Money and Markets Really Work. I was introduced to Kyla through my friends over at The Compound. And again, if you want to check out our YouTube show called Jill on Money, powered by The Compound, we've got a link to it on our website, jillonmoney.com. Josh and Michael really identified something so clear in this woman, and that's why they introduced me to her. And that is that she has a way of talking about the economy and how it impacts our lives that kind of breaks through all the jargon. So I don't want to just step on her too much. So here is the first part of our interview with Kyla Scanlon. I want to talk first about a little bit about you. How would you describe yourself in terms of your training or your background? You wrote a book about the economy. Were you an economics major?
Yeah. So I grew up in Kentucky and I went to Western Kentucky University, full ride, got super lucky with getting that. And when I got to school, I didn't even know that you could major in finance. I was going to be an engineer. But what was funny about that part of the journey is that I had been options trading in high school, but didn't know that this was a whole corporate life. And so once I realized that what I had been doing in high school was essentially a major, I switched over into econ and finance and data analytics. I kept a blog all throughout college called Scanlon on Stocks, where I talked about my options trading journey and all the money I lost. And then I went to work for Capital Group out in Los Angeles after I graduated. And so I have quite a bit of background in econ and in finance, and then have always just really loved explaining things. I've always wanted to be a teacher. And so I've kind of indirectly tried to do that through social media. And now I've had the wonderful opportunity to write this book and share it with people.
That's so awesome. Now, my first job on Wall Street, I was an options trader on the floor of the commodities exchange. I traded gold, silver, and copper options. Wow. And I loved when people like you were entering the options market.
Seriously.
That was the best. That's so mean
No, it's
to say.
True. No, it's real. It's real. Yeah.
So why? So I did, of course I picked up on this. And so why did you trade options? I mean, how is it that you stumbled upon this? Did you know someone in an industry that would have introduced you to it? How did this happen?
So my dad was doing this options trading journey through Tasty Trade, and I saw him doing it, and I was like, "What's going on there?" And he was like, "You're gonna have to learn it yourself." And I was like, "Okay, that sounds cool." And so I learned through this group called Tasty Trade, and then got parental approval on my account. And then I did paper trading as well. So I practiced a lot of things. And then I was always nervous when it came to real money, which is why I think I'm not an investor and instead talk about markets.
So when you were trading, so paper trading was always a fun thing because I'll tell you, when I started, we started out as clerks on the floor of the commodities exchange, and then we would all do paper trading. In other words, we would keep track. Here's the trade I would make if I were there right now. And then you'd be like, oh my God, look at how much money I would have made. And of course, there is a vast difference between putting something down on paper and having the feeling of either the euphoria of earning or making money or the agony of losing. And so the transition from paper trading to being a real trader is pretty important. So what did you learn in the transition?
I learned that I am pretty risk averse, that I preferred paper trading. And for me, it was just okay, I don't really need to be trading options. I can just throw my money into an ETF and be okay. So that was my path, was realizing that is not a lifestyle for me. And if it works for other people, that's great. But not for me. Yeah.
And you know what? It only took me 3.5 years to figure that out. You figured it out very quickly.
Yes. Yeah.
So when you talk to people, and I'm not saying, it's weird. I feel like some people are like, she's the one to talk to young people. But no, this is for everybody.
Thanks.
What is the critical problem in the way that we're communicating economic information to the masses? I mean, this is really helpful to me because when I go on CBS News and I'm talking to millions of people, what is it that we're getting wrong? What are people not understanding?
I spent an extraordinary amount of time thinking about this. So I travel quite a bit for work right now. And so I've been able to like go to a bunch of cities. Like I was just in DC, just in Miami, and I talked to a lot of people there. And like oftentimes they're not aware of certain policies that have been passed, or like they're not aware of like how inflation actually impacts them other than like making things more expensive. And I don't know if it's like a foundational economic knowledge level. Like we don't really have required economics in school. And so it's kind of a lot to expect that people will understand econ without having access to the knowledge, which is like part of the reason that I wrote that book. Hopefully, you know, anybody that wants it can understand it. But then I also think, you know, like there is a little bit of confusion with media. Like media has a really hard job where they're trying to explain these huge economic concepts in the light of economic news. And that's really difficult. And then I think the third thing is economics is an incredibly personal experience, right? Like everybody has a personal inflation rate. Everybody has a personal experience with the labor market. And so we oftentimes talk in aggregates and averages and medians. And for a regular person, they're like, but that's not my story. And so it's really tough because I think we're missing out on the foundational level of economics education. I think media sometimes can exacerbate issues that have existed since the beginning of time. And then I think number two, people struggle parsing things from averages.
Yeah. And I think that that's such a great point, that people don't live their lives remembering that before the pandemic, prices did go up every year unless something horrible was happening. The prices went up every year. So do you think that that's valuable just to reiterate where we have been? Or do you think people are like, I don't care where we were, I care where I am now?
Yeah, no, I don't think people care, but I think it's really valuable. I think that there's sort of almost a memory block from pre-pandemic times. Like people are like, that's not real. I don't even remember what it was like before lockdown. But I think it is useful to like look back at that and be like, well, you know, certain things are better. Like wages are growing, like inflation is going down, right? But yeah, I think people are very focused on the present moment. And then the other tough part about that is that people are more focused on the short term than the long term, right? And so like you could talk about things are trending in the right direction, but if they're not fixed by tomorrow, it's kind of like, well, why are you telling me about it?
Right.
You know? Yeah.
And also, as you said, it's like my personal experience. This would always seem to come down to, well, I don't make that much money. So it's all well and good that like your stocks are up, but I don't have investments. And 3/4 of my income is going to cover these massive categories of, let's call it housing, transportation, and food. And so like, stop talking about the interest rates or anything like that. Like how do you break through to someone like that to understand that all of this is interrelated? And as you say, it comes down to you because how we feel also can influence the economy, right?
Yeah. How people feel really matters because it shapes their behaviors. Like expectations ultimately shape behavior. This is something I've had a lot of time spent thinking about. Like the first chapter of the book is around the economic kingdom, where I try to talk about the interrelatedness between inflation and the labor market and GDP and the Federal Reserve and fiscal policy and the dollar. But I think it's like very abstract. Like the economy is extremely abstract. There are a lot of moving pieces. Even as somebody who like thinks about it every day, I still am like, what's going on? And so I think it's just useful to reiterate like how the interconnectivity works. But yeah, most of the time people they want to hear how it impacts them. And I think we've kind of left people to a disadvantaged point because the main way to build wealth in the US is through real estate, right? And so like when you're talking about the stock market as you were, and people not feeling like they're participating in that, it's like, well, why aren't they? Like, how can we get more people involved in the stock market and not be reliant on the value of their home skyrocketing, right? I think there's like causes and symptoms that are difficult to address.
Do you think that the idea that how you feel and that how you may act around this, does it really influence the economy? And here's what I'm going to say. When I'm so old that, I used to have bosses who would say, I don't look at consumer sentiment. I could not care less. I only care what they do.
Sure.
And so and I'm sure that, you can talk to a million people and we all complain about prices, but if we're still spending, regardless of the complaints, what use is it to really think about how we're feeling?
Yeah, I think that's been the big question. A lot of people have been like, people are spending a ton of money, but they're saying that they're feeling so bad. And I think now, like, we're starting to see delinquency rates begin to tick up. We're seeing savings begin to drop. And it's sort of like, I think sentiment is more of an indicator toward the future. Like, people are feeling bad, but they're still going to be spending money, at least in the short term. But in the long term, like, this sentiment downturn could be problematic. What's sort of funny about that, though, is that sentiment has ticked up at least a little bit. It's up, I think, 6% from this time last year, even considering the circumstances I just described. But I think it's just like the way that we oftentimes talk about the economy can sort of leave people out of it. Like, we do talk about it in a really abstract way, like inflation is up and this is what's happening. And I think just storytelling is really important there, because I think how people feel does matter. And like the more stories that we can tell about how people feel, like hopefully that'll help them feel better. So it might not be a one-to-one relationship with like actual economic impact, but I think for the long term, it's really important.
So when you are when you're doing all of the stuff that you put out there and you get responses to it, do people come after you when you say things like, well, the inflation rate is improving? They're like, oh, but prices are still high. Like, do people come after you to almost complain that not for me, or are they just thank you so much for explaining it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a mix of both. Yeah. So I'm for some people, I am a projection of their imagination that they are going to lobby every insult at me possible.
How could they? You're so nice. Come on.
I'm not real. I'm somebody on their screen.
Right.
And so I just become like this figurative being that is telling them that things are good when maybe their circumstances are not. And so they're like, this person is lying and I'm going to say horrible things to them. But then I have people who are like, thank you for explaining what an inflation rate is and why that's different than, price levels. So it's, this, like the internet is a cesspool. It's a mix of both. Yeah.
I know, but I'm feeling very protective of you. Like, don't be mean to Kyla. She's awesome. I also feel like what happens in my world, again, like oldster world, like I'm an old certified financial planner and I've been doing this. So I will get a question from someone like a niece, nephew age person for me, which would be like your age. And they'll say like, I saw something on TikTok, and I'm like, that's garbage. Like that's my first reaction. But I do think that it's very hard to parse out the Kylas and the Jills, if I may put myself in your camp,
sure,
from other people who are saying trash on social media, but that people are consuming that trash. I don't know how to break through that.
Yeah, you can't, right? There's, it's really difficult because like, the way to go viral is to like lie and to say extremist things and to be like, BlackRock is going to eat your family in the middle of the night. Like that's like how you go viral on TikTok. Right. Because, we're humans. And so our human brains are like, oh my gosh, I have to protect myself against this. Like BlackRock's going to eat my family. And so it's much easier to game the algorithm that way. If you're telling the truth about things and if you're just trying to explain things in objective, like nuanced manner, that doesn't always go as far. And so you're just competing against, the human bias, but then you're also competing against everything in the world ever, which is like everything on media. And yeah, the algorithms are just, they're rage bait.
If you've got questions about the economy or anything else going on in your own financial life, just go to our website, jillonmoney.com, and click the Contact Us button. We'd love to hear from you. Maybe you'd like us to demystify some economic data point that you've heard about, or maybe you want to respond to the interview. Wait till tomorrow, because we're going to have the second part of our interview with Kyla tomorrow. In any event, all of our content does live on the website. and we encourage you to check it out. You can subscribe to us on the Odyssey app or wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Please lift someone up, change your work, change your wealth, change your life. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.